One wrong number can cost a fortune, but in Julian Moretti's world, it usually costs a life. Clara Vance was just a waitress at New York's most exclusive underground restaurant, invisible, overworked, and barely scraping by. She knew the golden rule: never look the VIPs in the eye and never ever listen to their conversations. But when she glanced at the napkin on table 4 and saw a calculation that was off by $3 million, her obsession with numbers overrode her survival instinct. She spoke up. She corrected the most dangerous man in the city. And that single sentence didn't just change the equation. It turned her from a nobody into the only witness to a betrayal. The rain in Manhattan doesn't wash the city clean. It just makes the grime slicker. Inside the Gilded Lily, however, the weather was irrelevant. The restaurant, tucked away behind an unmarked steel door in Tribeca, smelled of aged mahogany truffle oil and fear. Clara Vance adjusted her apron, her fingers trembling slightly as she smoothed the fabric over her hip. It was 9:45 p.m. Her feet were throbbing a dull ache that radiated up her calves, but her face remained a mask of polite, vacuous service. That was the job. Be pleasant, be efficient, be invisible. She was good at being invisible. It was how she had survived dropping out of MIT 3 years ago, when her father's gambling debts imploded their lives. It was how she navigated a world that had chewed her up and spit her out. Now, instead of analyzing algorithmic trends for hedge funds, she was pouring a distinct vintage of Barolo for men who likely killed people for a living. Table 4 needs a refill. The floor manager. A nervous man named Arthur hissed in her ear. Don't hover. Just pour and go. It's him. Clara didn't need to ask who him was. The atmosphere in the room had shifted the moment the man walked in 20 minutes ago. The ambient chatter of the other diners, judges, politicians, and high-end escorts had dropped to a hushed murmur. Julian, the architect, Moretti. He was younger than the rumors suggested, perhaps in his early 30s, with hair the color of midnight and eyes that looked like shattered ice. He wore a charcoal 3-piece suit that cost more than Clara would make in 5 years. He didn't look like a thug. He looked like a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, which in a dark, twisted way he was. Clara approached the table, the bottle of red wine heavy in her hand. Julian was not alone. Sitting opposite him was a sweating, balding man named Mr. Henderson, who Clara recognized from the business section of the newspaper, a logistics magnate. "The ports are tight, Julian," Henderson was saying, his voice shaking as he dabbed his forehead with a linen napkin. "The customs fees, the union surcharge, the overhead has gone up. That's why the net is lower this month." Julian didn't speak. He was staring at a piece of paper on the table, a handwritten ledger Henderson had slid over. Julian's hand, holding a heavy fountain pen, hovered over the bottom line. He seemed to be doing mental math, his expression unreadable. Clara moved silently to Henderson's side to refill his glass. As she poured, her eyes inadvertently dropped to the paper. It was a hazard of her brain. She couldn't help it. She saw numbers the way other people saw colors. They jumped out at her, arranging themselves into patterns and sequences. It was a shipping manifest summary. Gross weight tare weight unit price tariff percentage. 15,000 units. $400 per unit. 12% tariff. 4% union fee. Henderson had written the total deduction at the bottom, $1,200,000. Clara's brain crunched the numbers in a fraction of a second, faster than a calculator. 15,000 times 400 is 6 million. 12% of 6 million is 720,000. 4% of 6 million is $240,000. Total deduction should be $960,000. Henderson was skimming. He was inflating the costs by exactly $240,000 and hoping the complexity of the combined percentages would hide it. He was stealing $250,000 from Julian Moretti right to his face. Clara froze. The wine bottle hovered. She should walk away. This wasn't her business. If she spoke, she was inserting herself into a conversation between a wolf and a sheep who was about to be slaughtered. But the sheer audacity of the error, the mathematical insult of it, itchy under her skin. Julian began to sign off on the ledger. He was accepting the lie. "Excuse me," Clara said. Her voice was soft, but in the terrified silence of the table it sounded like a gunshot. Julian's hand stopped. The pen tip rested on the paper, bleeding a small circle of black ink. Henderson looked up, his face flushing red. "What?" "We didn't ask for anything, sweetheart. Go away." "The wine, sir," Clara said, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She finished pouring, but she didn't leave. She looked at Julian. Slowly, Julian Moretti raised his head. For the first time, those ice-blue eyes locked onto hers. The air in the restaurant seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Did you have something to add?" Julian asked. His voice was a low baritone, smooth as velvet, but wrapped around a razor blade. Clara gripped the empty tray against her chest. "The math," she whispered. "It's wrong." Henderson laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "Excuse me, the girl is confused. Arthur. Get her out of here." Julian held up a hand, a single finger. Henderson silenced himself instantly. "Explain," Julian commanded, staring only at Clara. "The deductions," Clara said, her voice gaining a fraction more confidence. "The tariff and the union fee combined are 16% of the gross. 16% of 6 million is 960,000. The paper says 1.2 million. She pointed a slender finger at the ledger, avoiding touching it. "You're being overcharged by $240,000. Sir." The silence that followed was absolute. It was heavy, suffocating, and violent. Henderson's face drained of all color, turning a sickly shade of gray. He looked from the waitress to the ledger, and then to the man sitting across from him. She doesn't know what she's talking about," Henderson stammered, sweat now pouring down his temples. "Variable rates, Julian. It's the variable rates. A waitress wouldn't understand the complexities of international maritime law." Julian didn't look at Henderson. He didn't look at the guards standing in the shadows, whose hands had already moved inside their jackets, reaching for holstered weapons. He kept his eyes on Clara. He was studying her, dissecting her, the way a scientist studies a new volatile element. 16%, Julian repeated quietly. He picked up the ledger. He didn't use a calculator. He stared at the rows of numbers for 5 long seconds. Then a small, dark smile touched the corner of his mouth. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a predator, realizing the trap had been sprung. "She's right," Julian said. He closed the ledger with a soft thud. "Julian, please, it's a clerical error." Henderson gasped, half rising from his seat. "My accountant. He's new. He must have carried the one wrong." "Sit down, Robert," Julian said. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. Henderson collapsed back into his chair, looking like a man awaiting the gallows. Julian turned his body fully toward Clara. Up close, she saw the sharp angles of his jaw, the faint scar running through his left eyebrow. He was terrifyingly handsome, but the danger radiating off him was palpable. "What is your name?" he asked. "Clara," she managed to say. "Clara Vance." "Clara Vance." He tested the name on his tongue. "You calculated 16% of 6 million in your head in the time it took you to pour a glass of Cabernet." I'm good with numbers, sir." "Evidently." Julian reached into his jacket pocket. For a terrifying second, Clara thought he was pulling a gun. Instead, he pulled out a silver money clip. He peeled off a crisp $100 bill and placed it on the table. "For the tip," he said. "Thank you, sir." Clara took a step back, her legs feeling like jelly. She just wanted to get to the kitchen clock out and run until she reached the Bronx. "However," Julian continued, stopping her in her tracks, "you have created a problem for me, Clara. I didn't mean to. You have exposed a liability." Julian gestured vaguely at Henderson, who was now weeping silently. "And you have seen confidential business figures." Julian snapped his fingers. 2 men in dark suits materialized from the shadows behind Clara. One was massive with a neck as thick as a tree trunk. "Escort Mr. Henderson to the car," Julian said to the massive guard. "We'll discuss his arithmetic errors at the warehouse." Henderson began to sob openly as the guard hoisted him up by the armpit and dragged him toward the back exit. The diners pretended not to see. This was the Gilded Lily. You paid for the food, and you paid for the privilege of ignoring what happened at the other tables. "And her?" the second guard asked, nodding at Clara. Julian stood up. He buttoned his suit jacket. He towered over her, 6'3" of dominance and power. "Bring her to my office," Julian said. Clara's blood ran cold. "Sir, I really have to get back to work." "My manager, your shift is over." Julian said, his tone final. "You just saved me $250,000. I think I can afford to buy out your contract for the night." He walked past her, smelling of expensive cologne and gun oil. He stopped and looked back over his shoulder. "Don't make me wait, Clara. I hate waiting almost as much as I hate bad math." Clara looked at the floor manager, Arthur. Arthur was cowering by the kitchen door, shaking his head, frantically mouthing, "Just go." He wasn't going to help her. No one was going to help her. The guard, a younger man, with a scar on his cheek, gestured toward the velvet-roped staircase that led to the private second floor. "After you, miss." Clara swallowed the lump in her throat. Her heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. 120 beats per minute. 130. She had corrected the math. She had been right. And now she was going to pay the price. She turned and began the long walk up the stairs, the guard's footsteps heavy behind her, leading her straight into the lion's den. The office on the second floor of the Gilded Lily was soundproof. The moment the heavy oak door clicked shut behind Clara, the ambient hum of the restaurant, the clinking silverware, the jazz, the laughter vanished instantly. It was replaced by a silence so profound it felt like pressure against her eardrums. Clara stood by the door, hugging her arms around her chest. The room was dimly lit by vintage brass lamps that cast long, distorted shadows against walls lined with bookshelves. The smell here was different. No food, no wine. It smelled of leather dust and something metallic, like the copper tang of blood or old coins. Julian Moretti stood behind a massive desk made of dark walnut. He had his back to her, staring out of a rain-streaked window that overlooked the alleyway below. Down there in the darkness, a black SUV was idling. Clara knew Henderson was inside it. She tried not to calculate the odds of him surviving the night. The probability was low. approaching 0. "Sit," Julian said. He didn't turn around. Clara's legs moved on autopilot. She sat on the edge of a stiff leather chair opposite the desk. She kept her knees pressed together, her hands folded in her lap to hide their shaking. She felt like a child called into the principal's office. Only this principal had the power to erase her existence. Julian turned slowly. He walked to a crystal decanter on a side table and poured 2 fingers of amber liquid. He didn't offer her any. He took a sip, the ice clinking softly against the glass, his eyes never leaving her face. "MIT," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. Clara blinked, startled. "How did you—" "I had my security team run your background the moment we left the table," Julian interrupted smoothly. He walked around the desk and sat down, leaning back, claiming the space with effortless lethargy. "Clara Vance, scholarship student, 4.0 GPA, double major in applied mathematics and statistical analysis, dropped out 3 years ago." "Why?" Clara swallowed dryly. "Personal reasons." "Your father's gambling debt," Julian corrected her reading from a mental file. $70,000 to the fretwork of loan sharks in Queens. You dropped out to work 3 jobs to pay the vigorish so they wouldn't break his legs. A noble if inefficient sacrifice. He placed the glass down on the desk. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. "You have a brain that can process complex algorithms in seconds, yet you spend your nights serving pasta to men who can barely read a menu. It's a waste of resources, and I detest waste." "I do what I have to do," Clara whispered. A flash of defiance sparked in her chest, overriding the fear for a fleeting second. "And I paid that debt off. Every cent." "I know," Julian said. "But you're still here, waiting tables. It's the only job that pays cash daily. I can't leave a paper trail. If I open a bank account, the IRS will garnish it for my student loans." Julian studied her for a long moment. The silence stretched again, thick and heavy. He wasn't looking at her body, though she was undeniably beautiful in a fragile, haunted way. He was looking at her eyes, watching the way they darted around the room, counting, assessing. "What are you counting right now?" he asked softly. Clara froze. Nothing." "Don't lie to me, Clara. You looked at the bookshelf, then the floor tiles, then the window panes. You're counting." She let out a shaky breath. "The books are arranged by height, not author. It creates an asymmetry of 3 inches on the left side. The floor is herringbone, but the pattern breaks near the wall, suggesting a renovation in the last 10 years, where the dimensions were miscalculated by 2 centimeters. And you blink every 4.5 seconds, which is slower than average, meaning you are extremely calm. Or a sociopath." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. She clamped her mouth shut, her eyes widening in horror. She had just called a Mafia boss a sociopath. For a second, Julian's face was stone. Then a slow, genuine amusement transformed his features. It didn't make him look safe. A tiger is still a tiger when it purrs, but it made him breathtakingly magnetic. "Observant," he murmured, "and dangerous." He opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a thick leather-bound binder. It was old, the corners frayed. He dropped it onto the desk. It landed with a heavy thump that sent dust motes dancing in the lamplight. "Henderson was a small fish," Julian said, his voice dropping to a lower, more serious register. "He was skimming off the top. Sloppy. Easy to catch, but I have a bigger problem, Clara. A much more complex problem." He slid the binder across the mahogany surface toward her. This is the master ledger for my construction holdings in New Jersey. For 6 months, the accounts have balanced perfectly, to the cent. My accountants tell me it is flawless. My auditors tell me it is clean. Julian leaned forward, his elbows on the desk, his eyes locking onto hers with intensity. But the cash flow is bleeding. I am losing money, and the books say I am making it. Somewhere in these pages, there is a ghost, a formula, a trick that my people are too stupid or too involved to see. Clara looked at the binder. It was thick, containing hundreds of pages of spreadsheets. You want me to find it? I want to see if you are as good as you think you are, Julian said. You have 1 hour. If you find the leak, you walk out of here with $10,000 in cash and my gratitude. If you don't... He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The implication hung in the air like smoke. And if I find something you don't want me to see? Clara asked, her voice barely a whisper. Julian's eyes darkened. In my world, Clara knowledge is leverage, but it is also a burden. Once you see it, you carry it. Are you ready for that weight? Clara looked at the door. She could leave. She could try to run. But she knew with mathematical certainty that she wouldn't make it to the street. She reached out and opened the binder. 20 minutes passed. The only sound in the office was the rhythmic turning of pages and the scratching of a pencil Clara had pulled from her apron pocket. She had forgotten about Julian. She had forgotten about the gun in his drawer, the guard outside the door, and the rain lashing against the window. She was in the zone. For Clara, numbers were not just ink on paper. They were a language. They had a texture, a rhythm, a musicality. When a column of numbers was honest, it hummed with a harmonic resonance. When there was a lie, it felt discordant, like a piano key struck out of tune. This ledger didn't just have a wrong note. It was a symphony of dissonance disguised as a perfect melody. She worked feverishly. Her hair had fallen out of its messy bun strands hanging over her face, but she didn't brush them away. Her eyes scanned rows of supply costs, labor unions, concrete pours and waste management fees. Concrete grade 4, volume 40,000 cubic yards, cost $115 per yard. Rebar, tensile strength 60, tonnage 5,000. On the surface it was perfect. The sums matched the totals. The taxes were calculated correctly, but the rhythm was wrong. Julian watched her from his chair. He hadn't moved. He hadn't touched his drink. He was fascinated. He had seen women try to seduce him with their bodies, with their connections, with their feigned innocence. He had never seen a woman seduce him with her intellect. The way she chewed on the end of the pencil, the furrow of her brow, the absolute predatory focus in her eyes, it was intoxicating. She wasn't a waitress anymore. She was a hunter, and the numbers were her prey. "Stop," Clara said suddenly. She didn't look up. She flipped back 10 pages, then forward 20. She circled a number on page 42. She flipped back to page 12 and circled another. "Do you have a calculator?" She asked, her voice abstract, distant. "I thought you didn't need one," Julian replied, amused. "I don't need it for the math," she muttered, scribbling a formula in the margin of the ledger, desecrating his documents. "I need it to check the distribution." Julian slid a heavy brass calculator across the desk. Clara snatched it, her fingers flying over the keys. Click, click, click. She stared at the result. She paled. The pencil dropped from her hand. "Oh," she breathed. "Tell me," Julian commanded. The amusement was gone. He leaned forward, the predator reawakening. Clara looked up, her eyes wide. She seemed to realize where she was again, the fear rushing back in, but it was mixed with the thrill of the solve. "It's not theft," she said. "It's a mirror." "Explain," simply. Clara turned the ledger around to face him. She pointed to a series of invoices for waste management consulting. "Look at the cents," she said. 33, 6, 99, 12, 45. "Do you see the pattern?" Julian frowned. "No, it's a recursive sequence. Every third invoice for the consulting fees is inflated by a factor of 1.2, but the corresponding labor cost on the construction site is reduced by 0.2 to balance the total output. The money isn't leaving the bottom line, so your total looks correct." "So where is the money going?" "It's being recategorized," Clara explained, tracing the line with her finger. "The consulting firm doesn't exist, or if it does, it's a shell. The money paid to them, millions, Julian, is actually your money, but it's being washed out of the construction budget and moved into a liability column that you write off as a tax loss. Essentially, someone is taking your profit, turning it into a fake loss so you don't look at it, and then pocketing the fee." Julian's face went dangerously still. "How much?" "Over the last 6 months. $4.2 million. Julian closed his eyes for a brief second. A muscle in his jaw jumped. $4 million. Stolen by a ghost company. "It gets worse," Clara said softly. This was the part that terrified her. This was the part that would get someone killed. "What could be worse than $4 million? The consulting firm," Clara whispered. "I recognize the tax ID number. It's almost identical to the vendor ID for your wine supplier downstairs. Only 2 digits are swapped. It's not a random error. It's a signature." Julian's eyes snapped open. They were shards of ice. The wine supplier was managed by his cousin Dante, his blood, the man he trusted to watch his back when he walked through the city. The silence in the room changed texture again. It wasn't just heavy, it was lethal. Clara realized she had just handed Julian the knife to cut his own family's throat. Julian stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at the rain again. He was silent for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was devoid of all emotion. "You have a singular talent, Clara." He turned to face her. "You found in 20 minutes what a team of Ivy League accountants missed for half a year." He walked back to the desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out a thick envelope. He tossed it to her. 10,000, as promised. Clara grabbed the envelope. Her hands were shaking so badly, she almost dropped it. "Thank you. Can I go now?" Julian looked at her. He looked at the messy bun, the cheap waitress uniform, the intelligence shining in her fearful eyes. "Go," Julian repeated. He laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Clara, you just identified a $4 million betrayal by my own lieutenant. You are the only person outside of this room who knows how the scheme works." He placed his hands on the desk and leaned in close to her face. She could smell the bourbon on his breath mixed with the scent of danger. "If I let you walk out that door, Dante will kill you before you reach the subway. He covers his tracks, and you are now a loose end." Clara's heart stopped. You said if I found it, I could leave." "I lied," Julian said softly. "I'm a criminal, Clara. We lie." He walked around the desk and stood next to her chair. He reached down and gently tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were warm, his touch startlingly gentle for a man discussing murder. "You can't go back to waiting tables. You can't go back to your apartment in Queens. You are in the game now." "I don't want to be in the game," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "No one does." Julian replied. "But you're too valuable to die, and you're too dangerous to be let loose." He extended his hand to her. "Stand up, Clara. You're promoted." "Promoted to what?" she asked, her voice trembling. "My personal auditor," Julian said, his eyes locking onto hers with a possessive intensity. "And until this war is over, my prisoner." Clara stood up. The movement was mechanical, devoid of the grace she usually possessed. Her legs felt like they were made of lead, and the floor beneath her seemed to tilt. "My coat," she murmured, looking toward the door. "My purse, they're in the staff locker room." "Leave them," Julian said. His voice was no longer the velvet purr of a seducer. It was the crisp, efficient tone of a general commanding a retreat. "Everything in that locker implies you are Clara the waitress. That person no longer exists. I will replace everything." He walked to the wall and pressed a hidden panel. The bookshelf swung open silently, revealing a narrow, dim service elevator. It was a classic escape route, something out of a movie, but the cold draft of air that hit Clara's face was very real. It smelled of wet concrete and exhaust fumes. "After you," Julian gestured. Clara stepped into the small metal box. Julian followed, and the bookshelf clicked shut, sealing them in. The space was intimate, too small for two people who were practically strangers, yet inextricably bound by a $4 million secret. As the elevator descended with a low hum, Clara pressed her back against the metal wall, putting as much distance between herself and the Mafia boss as possible. She closed her eyes and tried to force her brain to work. Panic was just a chemical reaction, cortisol and adrenaline. It was a variable she had to account for. Variable A. I am a witness. Variable B. Dante is a family member who kills to protect his interests. Variable C. Julian needs me. Stop calculating. Julian's voice cut through the dark. Clara's eyes snapped open. He was watching her, his face illuminated by the flickering overhead light. "I can hear your heart rate," he said softly. "You're hyperventilating. Breathe through your nose. 4 seconds in, 4 seconds out." "I'm not hyperventilating." She snapped, her fear momentarily giving way to anger. "I'm analyzing my probability of survival. It's currently hovering around 12%. Julian stepped closer. The elevator was so small his shoes touched the tips of her worn-out sneakers. "Your math is flawed," he said. "You're factoring in only your own ability to survive. You aren't accounting for mine." The elevator jolted to a halt. The doors slid open to reveal a private underground garage. It was cavernous, lit by harsh fluorescent strips. In the center sat a convoy of 3 black armored SUVs. Engines were already idling, filling the air with a low, vibrating growl. Men with earpieces and assault rifles stood by the vehicles. They didn't look at Clara. They scanned the perimeter, their bodies tense. This wasn't a ride home. It was a military extraction. Julian placed a hand on the small of her back. The heat of his palm burned through her thin uniform. He guided her toward the middle vehicle. "Inside," he ordered. Clara climbed into the back seat. The interior was lined with cream leather and smelled of new car and old scotch. The windows were tinted so dark it felt like night inside. Julian slid in next to her, and the heavy door thudded shut with the solidity of a bank vault. As the convoy peeled out of the garage and onto the rain-slicked streets of Tribeca, Clara looked out the window. The city passed by in a blur of neon and grey. She saw a woman walking a dog, a couple arguing on a corner. Normal life. A life she had been living 10 minutes ago. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small. "The Airy," Julian said, checking a message on his phone. "My private residence. It's the only place in the city Dante can't access without triggering a war. He's your cousin, Clara said, turning to look at his profile. How can you be so sure that he did this? Julian didn't look up from his phone. Because Dante has always been greedy, but he lacks vision. He sees a pile of money and takes a handful. He doesn't understand that if you leave the pile alone and invest it, it becomes a mountain. He turned to her, then his expression unreadable. And he knows I audit the books personally. He knows I check the math. That's why he used the recursive algorithm you found. He hired a mathematician to hide the theft, thinking I wouldn't spot the pattern. Julian's eyes narrowed slightly. He was right. I didn't spot it. You did. So I'm the glitch, Clara whispered. You are the anomaly, Julian corrected. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek black smartphone. He held it out to her. Your new phone. It is encrypted. No jeeps, no cloud backups. Use it only to contact me. Clara took the phone. It felt heavy, like a weapon. What about my dad? I have to call him. He worries if I'm not home by 2. I have already sent a team to your father's apartment in Queens, Julian said calmly. Clara dropped the phone. It clattered onto the leather floor mat. You did what? He is being moved to a secure facility in upstate, Julian said, his voice level, ignoring her outburst. If Dante knows you found the money, he will use your father as leverage to get you to recant. I have removed that leverage. You kidnapped my father, Clara screamed, reaching for the door handle. It was locked. Let me out. You can't just... Julian caught her wrist. His grip was iron but not painful. He pulled her back, forcing her to look at him. I saved his life. Clara. Julian's voice rose, cracking the calm facade for the first time. The intensity in his eyes silenced her. Dante has men in Queens. They would have been at your door in an hour. Your father is safe. He is being told you won a corporate internship that requires relocation. He is happy. He is safe. Clara trembled, tears spilling over her lashes. She hated him. She hated his money, his suits, and his logic. But the terrifying part was that the numbers added up. He was right. You own me now, she whispered, her voice breaking. That's what this is. I'm just another asset in your ledger. Julian released her wrist. He sat back, smoothing his tie, the mask of indifference sliding back into place, but his eyes lingered on her tear-stained face with a strange softness. You're not an asset, Clara, he murmured, looking out at the rain. You're the only person in this city who isn't lying to me. The area was a fortress in the sky. It was a penthouse spanning the top 3 floors of a needle-thin skyscraper in Midtown. The elevator opened directly into a living space that was vast, cold, and breathtakingly expensive. Floor-to-ceiling glass walls offered a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline, a sea of lights struggling against the storm. The furniture was Italian, low-profile, and sharp-edged. There were no photos, no knickknacks, no warmth. It was the home of a man who didn't plan on staying long, or who didn't know how to live. Clara stepped out of the elevator, hugging herself. The air conditioning was set to a chill that bit through her waitress uniform. The guest suite is down the hall to the right, Julian said, tossing his keys onto a marble console table. There are clothes in the closet. My assistant bought them for various occasions. Find something that fits. I don't want your clothes, Clara said, standing her ground in the center of the vast room. I want to know when this ends. Julian walked over to a wet bar and poured himself a glass of water. He looked tired. The harsh lighting of the penthouse revealed the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the toll of carrying an empire that was rotting from the inside. "It ends when the audit is complete," Julian said. "That binder was just one project. I have 40 shell companies, 3 offshore trusts, and a logistics network that spans 5 continents. If Dante compromised the construction ledger, he has likely compromised others." He took a sip of water, watching her over the rim of the glass. "You are going to check them all?" Clara stared at him. "That could take months." "Then you better get comfortable." He walked past her toward a spiraling steel staircase. "I have work to do in the study. Don't try to leave. The elevators require a biometric scan. The stairs are alarmed. If you trigger them, the security team will assume you are an intruder, and they will not be gentle." "So I am a prisoner," Clara said bitterly. Julian paused on the first step. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable. "You are alive. In my world, that is a luxury. Don't squander it." He disappeared upstairs. Clara stood alone in the silent glass box. She walked to the window and pressed her hand against the cold pane. Down below, the city looked like a circuit board, a grid of energy and chaos. She felt small, a rounding error in a massive calculation. She eventually found the guest suite. It was larger than her entire apartment. The closet was filled with designer clothes, silk blouses, cashmere sweaters, tailored trousers, all with the tags still on. It was a wardrobe for a doll waiting to be dressed. She showered, scrubbing the smell of the restaurant and the fear sweat from her skin. She put on an oversized cashmere sweater and a pair of leggings. They were soft, impossibly warm. It was hard to stay angry when you were wrapped in money. She wandered back out to the living room. It was 2:00 a.m. She couldn't sleep. Her brain was still racing, replaying the numbers in the ledger. 1.2 factor. 0.2 deduction. Why? Why would Dante do it? He was rich. He was powerful. She saw a light spilling from under a door at the top of the stairs. Curiosity, her fatal flaw, pulled her upward. The door was ajar. She pushed it open gently. Julian was sitting at a massive desk, surrounded by monitors. He had discarded his suit jacket and tie. His dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar. Sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and covered in tattoos, intricate geometric patterns, lines and angles. Even his ink was mathematical. He was speaking on the phone, his voice low and dangerous. "I don't care what he says. Freeze the accounts. No, do not alert him yet. If he runs, we lose the money." "Yes." He hung up and rubbed his face with his hands. He looked up and saw her standing in the doorway. He didn't send her away. He simply watched her. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "I keep thinking about the sequence," Clara said, stepping into the room. "The invoice numbers. They ended in 33.6699. And it's a repeating decimal." Clara said, her eyes losing focus as the numbers took over. 1 divided by 3. It signifies a loop. Dante isn't just stealing the money. He's cycling it. Julian sat up straighter. "Cycling it, where he's putting it back into the company," Clara said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "But not as revenue, as debt." She walked over to the desk, forgetting her fear driven by the puzzle. She pointed at one of the screens. If he turns the profit into a loss and then loans the stolen money back to the company as high-interest debt from an external creditor, he creates a lever. Eventually, the debt becomes so high that the company defaults. Julian looked at the screen, then at her. His face went pale. "He forces a bankruptcy," Julian whispered. "And the external creditor claims the assets." "He's not trying to steal a few $1,000,000, Julian," Clara said, meeting his gaze. "He's trying to steal your entire empire. He wants to foreclose on you." The silence that followed was deafening. Julian stood up slowly. The realization of the betrayal was total. It wasn't just greed. It was a coup, a hostile takeover engineered by his own blood. Suddenly, the phone on the desk buzzed. A single text message. Julian looked down at it. His expression hardened into something terrifying. "What is it?" Clara asked, backing away. Julian turned the phone so she could see the screen. It was a photo. It was a grainy picture taken from a distance through a rainy window. It showed Clara standing in the living room of the penthouse, wearing the cashmere sweater looking out at the city. The timestamp was 5 minutes ago. Below the photo was a text. "I see you found a new accountant. Does she know how to count to 0? He knows you're here," Julian said, his voice void of emotion. "And he has a sniper on the adjacent roof." Clara's blood turned to ice. She looked at the window she had been standing in moments ago. Julian moved with a blur of speed. He grabbed her arm and yanked her down to the floor, dragging her behind the heavy oak desk, just as the glass of the balcony door shattered with a deafening crack. A bullet embedded itself in the wall, exactly where her head had been. "Stay down," Julian snarled, reaching under the desk and pulling out a handgun. He looked at her, his eyes blazing with a mix of fury and adrenaline. "The audit is paused, Clara. Now we survive." The bullet had decimated a patch of plaster inches from the mahogany floor, sending a cloud of white dust into the air. The smell was chalky and dry, mixing with the metallic tang of fear. Clara lay flat on her stomach, her cheek pressed against the cold hardwood. Beside her, Julian Moretti was a coiled spring. He had the handgun, a matte black Sig Sauer gripped in both hands, his breathing controlled, rhythmic, almost meditative. "He's on the north tower," Julian whispered, his voice vibrating through the floorboards. "8th floor. The angle is steep. He has a thermal scope. He can see our heat signatures through the desk." "He's not trying to kill us," Clara whispered back, her mind racing faster than her heart. "Not yet." Julian glanced at her, his eyebrow raised in the semi-darkness. "He just put a .338 La Pua Magnum round through my wall, Clara. That feels like an attempt." "No." Clara insisted, her eyes squeezing shut as she visualized the trajectory. The angle was too high. He aimed for the wall, not the window center. It's suppression fire. He's pinning us down. "Why? Time," Clara gasped. "Dante knows I found the loop. He knows I can unravel the debt structure. He needs 10 minutes to liquidate the accounts and move the capital offshore before we lock him out. The sniper is the distraction to keep us away from the computer." Julian cursed softly in Italian. He looked at the bank of monitors on the desk above them. They were glowing, taunting them. The keyboard was only 3 feet away, but in the line of fire, 3 feet was a death sentence. "Can you stop the transfer?" Julian asked. "If I can get to the terminal," Clara said, "I can invert the recursive function. Instead of cycling the money into the shell company, I can force a divide by 0 error in the routing number. The banking algorithm will panic and freeze the assets for a manual audit. It will lock Dante out completely." Julian checked the magazine of his weapon. 3 feet, 3 seconds. "I need 30 seconds to type the code," Clara said. "I'll buy you 60. Julian didn't hesitate. He grabbed a heavy bronze paperweight from under the desk and hurled it toward the broken balcony door. At the exact same moment, he rolled out from the left side of the desk, firing 3 rapid shots toward the distant rooftop. Crack, crack, crack. The sniper returned fire instantly. A bullet shattered a vase near Julian's head, sending shards of crystal flying. But the distraction worked. Clara scrambled out from the right side of the desk. She didn't stand up. She reached up blindly, her fingers scrabbling for the keyboard, and dragged it down to the floor. She pulled the wireless mouse down with it. "Type!" Julian roared, firing another round to keep the sniper's head down. Clara sat cross-legged on the floor, the keyboard in her lap, using the desk as a shield. She stared up at the monitors. She couldn't see the bottom of the screen from this angle, only the top half. It was enough. She saw the progress bar, transfer initiated, 85% complete. Her fingers flew across the keys. She wasn't trembling anymore. This was her world. Bullets were variables she couldn't control, but code obeyed her. Command override. Target shell corp alpha. Parameter input equals input. "Come on," she hissed. 90% complete. The sniper fired again. The bullet punched through the monitor directly above her head. Sparks showered down into her hair. She didn't flinch. She barely blinked. "Clara!" Julian shouted, reloading. Almost there. 95% complete. She hit the final sequence. Enter. On the screen, the progress bar froze. It turned red. A message flashed, large and jagged. Critical error. Segmentation fault. Assets frozen, pending federal review. The transfer stopped. The money, Julian's empire, was stuck in digital limbo, inaccessible to Dante, inaccessible to anyone. "It's done!" Clara screamed. "I froze it." "He has nothing." Suddenly the gunfire stopped. The silence that rushed back into the room was heavier than the noise. The wind whistled mournfully through the shattered glass. Julian stayed in a crouch for a long moment, listening. Then his phone rang. He didn't answer it. He stood up slowly, keeping away from the window, and walked over to Clara. He reached down and pulled her up from the floor. He checked her for injuries, his hands running over her arms, his eyes scanning her face. "You're bleeding," he said softly. Clara touched her cheek. A small shard of glass had nicked her. "I didn't notice." The phone rang again. Julian picked it up. He put it on speaker. "It's over, Dante," Julian said into the receiver. "You froze the accounts." Dante's voice came through tinny and strained. He sounded breathless, like he was running. "You froze everything. Do you know what you've done? The feds will see the flagged transaction. They'll seize it all." "Better the government than you," Julian said coldly. "Besides, my new auditor tells me that with the right paperwork, we can unfreeze it in a week. But you won't have a week." "Julian, listen, we can—" "The sniper has stopped firing," Julian interrupted. "Do you know why?" "Julian, because my team just breached the roof of the North Tower, and now they are coming for you." Julian hung up. He tossed the phone onto the couch. He looked at Clara. She was standing amidst the wreckage of his life, the broken glass, the bullet holes, the ruined electronics. She looked exhausted, her expensive sweater covered in drywall dust, her hair wild. She had never looked more beautiful to him. "You calculated the risk," Julian said, stepping closer. "You stayed in the line of fire to save money that isn't yours." "I wasn't saving the money," Clara said, her voice steady. "I was balancing the equation. Dante was the variable that needed to be eliminated. The math demanded it." Julian reached out and cupped her face in his hands. His thumbs brushed away the dust on her cheekbones. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by a deep, simmering heat. "You're wrong," Julian murmured. You're not an auditor, and you're certainly not a waitress." "What am I?" Clara whispered. "You're the partner I've been looking for." He kissed her. It wasn't a tentative kiss. It was possessive, demanding, and full of a dark promise. It tasted of danger and victory. Clara melted into him, her hands gripping the lapels of his shirt, anchoring herself against the storm. When they finally broke apart, Julian rested his forehead against hers. "Tomorrow," he said, "we deal with the feds. We deal with the cleanup. We rebuild." "And tonight?" Clara asked. Julian looked over her shoulder at the ruined apartment, then back into her eyes. A rare, genuine smile touched his lips. "Tonight," he said. "I think you should teach me more about that recursive algorithm. I have a feeling we have a lot of numbers to crunch." Clara smiled back. For the first time in years, the numbers in her head were quiet. The only thing she could count on was the man standing in front of her, and the probability of a happily ever after. It was statistically significant. And that is how Clara Vance went from serving tables to ruling the boardroom of New York's most dangerous empire. She learned that in life, just like in math, the variables can always change, but if you control the formula, you control the outcome. Julian Moretti might have been the boss, but Clara was the one who kept the books, and in their world, the person who holds the pen holds the power. They were a perfect equation, his force multiplied by her genius, creating a sum far greater than its parts. Wow, what a ride. I hope you enjoyed this story of high-stakes romance and intellectual warfare. If you loved Clara's transformation and want to see more stories about smart women outwitting the underworld, hit that like button. Right now, it really helps the channel. Question for you. Do you think Clara made the right choice staying with Julian, or should she have taken the money and run? Let me know your theory in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss the next part of our storytelling series. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.